Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us for today's session. The topic we're reviewing today is Catapulting Telecom into the Modern Age at a Small Liberal Arts College. I'm Adam Scarzafava, AVP for Marketing and Communications here at EDGE. We're a nonprofit research and education network and technology consortium based in New Jersey. We were formed by the President's Council for Higher Education here in the state of New Jersey. Back around the year 2000, the presidents in the state got together and I think came to the realization pretty wisely that the internet wasn't going anywhere and they needed to build themselves a service provider, a partner that could really help them excel in that world. And so that's what EDGE was formed to do. In the roughly 20 years since, the mission has grown to support not only higher education institutions, but K through 12 school districts, state and local government organizations, and others you see here. Really, anybody with a public serving mission, anybody that receives public funding, we exist to help them excel through the use of technology in their missions. But like I said, the backbone, the core, the heritage of what we do really is in higher education. And initially, when we were formed by the President's Council, we were formed to build a network around the state. We still own and operate that network called EdgeNet, really purpose-built for the higher education community, enables lots of really cool things and partnerships and connectivity to service providers out there in the cloud, with peering connections built to AWS and Google and all the cloud providers that you might need, as well as the kind of core services to your mission like Zoom. So really great quality of service on the network and lots of value add benefits to the higher education community, specifically beyond what you would get with a traditional ISP for your network connectivity. We also really enable technology-based research and discovery over that network. Edge Discovery is our research function, and we work really closely with research institutions to accelerate what they're able to do through the use of grants and effective use of technology. Edge Market is our strategic and informed consortium procurement arm. Edge operates a cooperative pricing system by the name of Edge Market, which enables us to go out to RFP on behalf of not only the higher ed institutions in the state of New Jersey, but really across the country to drive effective discounts, partnerships with vendors, and accelerated procurement outcomes that really help onboard technology quickly when you need it. We do events, networking, and community building, just like what we're doing here today. And then we work with our consortium members to really help them fill gaps that they might have through thought leadership and solution development within Edge as a nonprofit service provider. So we really help our members to accelerate digital transformation. That can happen in areas like cybersecurity, privacy, and compliance, where we offer a virtual CISO program to help accelerate cybersecurity compliance and performance, cloud strategy, digital teaching and learning, and really trying to advance and accelerate the use of these technologies to modernize the way that we do things in higher education across the board. But we do know that as a nonprofit, as the kind of organization that Edge is, we can't do everything and we can't be everything to everyone. And that's where relationships with real industry leading partners, innovative partners that are pushing the envelope on some of these solutions come into play. And so that's, I think, what we're here today to really dig into a bit with one of our kind of core partners with Zoom, and we'll get into a bit of the partnership. If you have any questions about that. And we have Johan Zimmern here from Zoom with us. Johan is Zoom's global education strategy lead, so a great resource for any questions that we might have there. And Johan's going to help to moderate the session today. But with that, I will kick it over to JD Mills. JD is the manager of digital campus and digital transformation at Davidson College, and he's going to be able to tell us a bit about Davidson's journey into onboarding Zoom Phone and what they've been able to do with that system and service from Zoom. So JD, with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and invite you to share yours and get going with the meat of today's content.
Very good. Thanks for that introduction, Adam. And I'm just going to go ahead and launch my screen sharing. Okay, y'all should be seeing the title slide now.
Yep.
All right. Thanks. Appreciate the warm welcome. And like Adam said, my name is JD Mills, and I manage the digital campus team at Davidson College. So you might be wondering, what exactly is a digital campus team? The easiest way to explain it is that we are the product owners and administrators for all of the collaboration and communication software that you would use regardless of your campus persona. So faculty, staff, student. And this includes things like Zoom and Zoom Phone, obviously, which we're here to talk about today. But it also includes Google Workspace, Microsoft 365, event management, digital signage, and all that sort of stuff. A little bit about me. I actually studied at Davidson from 2005 to 2007. And since that time, have worked in a variety of roles from help desk to student tech, IT manager at a structured cabling company, MSP work, IT director for hire, and then finally returning to Davidson in 2015 as a systems analyst, where I've kind of settled in for the last 7 years, which, it may be the case at your own institutions. Once people arrive, they tend to stay a while, right? So let me tell you a little bit about Davidson College to kind of give you some context. We were founded in 1837, and we're situated in the small town of Davidson, North Carolina, which is about, I'd say 25 miles north of Charlotte, North Carolina, if you know the area. And let's see, we are about 2,000 students strong, mostly drawn from North Carolina, the Southeast and the Mid-Atlantic region, many from, your region as well in the great state of New Jersey. And we are a small private liberal arts college. No shortage of those up where y'all are for the most part. We're undergraduate only, and 98% of our instructors who do our teaching have a terminal degree in their field. Some popular majors at Davidson include, political science, econ, biology/pre-med, and so on. And another notable thing about Davidson is that we have an unusually high level of alumni giving and participation, including from this gentleman right here, who's our most famous alum, Steph Curry, who just returned to finish his own degree on sort of the 10-year plan, a man of my own heart. This past fall, he achieved his bachelor's in sociology. So that's Davidson College. So you can see the bullets over on the left, kind of recapping what I just shared with y'all. But what about the IT division? Well, we've got about 37 IT staff, and it's all central IT over here. We have a couple of key campus partnerships, like in the registrar, advancement, admissions, and so on, power users who know how to write a little SQL or administer a platform that their office runs. But for the most part, it all happens in the central IT organization. Between all of those different groups, we manage 261 products and services, increasingly SaaS, where Zoom and Zoom Phone fit quite nicely. And we are, for now, a banner school. So we're in the process actually of migrating our HR and finance systems over to Oracle Cloud. That is our big focus for the year. But student is going to remain on banner for quite some time until the Oracle product evolves a bit, or some other folks, jump in the pool first. As far as spending, how much does a college like ours spend on IT? About 4% of the total budget is allocated to IT expenses. So let me give you some background on communication and collaboration at Davidson to set the stage. Historically, we've been kind of a choose your own adventure game. You heard me say just a second ago that we support both Google Workspace and Office 365. Well, we also at one point had Dropbox as our primary storage solution, right? So you can choose whatever you want to work on. We'll support everything, right? There's also in the chat landscape, there's a large Slack installation base on campus. Most of them are free teams. There's a handful of paid. And Zoom chat is becoming increasingly popular since the vast majority of our users have it running on their computer all day, every day, even if as a student, they're not using it for remote instruction anymore post-pandemic. Zoom has actually had a foothold at Davidson since about 2015. So we got a little bit of a jump on that, I think, compared to many institutions. And we had just switched from WebEx to Zoom, looking for a better solution for remote meetings. But when the pandemic hit, it really cemented Zoom as a key piece of communication and collaboration software in the broader service catalog. We went fully remote for instruction, which was pretty unusual for a brick and mortar institution of our type to try and make that leap, but we did it. We had to. And Zoom was instrumental in making that happen. So it's now a part of daily life at Davidson, administrative, and to a certain extent, still academic. So again, with this choose your own adventure, this fragmentation, as that's gone on, we've heard more and more from our users that it's just too confusing. There's too many platforms, too many places to go do a single thing. So we're starting to centralize where possible. Dropbox, I mentioned, recently migrated to Google Drive, and we're just doing more to steer users into a preferred platform where multiple options exist. The long run goal is to just reduce that fragmentation wherever possible. The HRIS and finance project I mentioned is one way we're trying to get on this. A lot of these satellite best of breed applications around like time clock and performance management that Banner didn't do particularly well, Oracle's going to do a bit better. So some of those will fall away. And in the communication landscape, one thing that's been really encouraging, watching, say, Zoomtopia this year, is efforts that they have increased to make it a single pane of glass communication platform. So, the introduction of, say, mail into the tool, where, you've already got phone, you've already got chat, you've already got meetings, reduces that task switching and that fragmentation that, in our experience and through the hundreds or thousands of hours that we've studied this issue, really put negative pressure on the user experience. So that's kind of what is going through our minds right now. So we really do view the phone system, like I said, as just another part of the digital campus experience, and not necessarily this out on an island piece of infrastructure that is totally disconnected from the rest. Increasingly, it's just another tab in the app that you're already using. A quick word on diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to communication and collaboration on campus. You've got all these options. How could you possibly leave anyone out in the cold? Well, it turns out, again, after having studied this issue, you could leave them out quite easily, right? So we have a particular cohort at Davidson that is just not receiving or not connected to the digital communication sphere in the same way that their peers and colleagues are, and that is hourly staff. So, for example, we find that, whereas a faculty member might send one email for every 2 they receive, and a student, say a first year, might receive 8 for every one, an hourly staff member might, receive 30 for every one that they send. And it's not really just about the volume of email either. It's also about their open rates. So a Davidson hourly staff member is actually 5 times less likely to even open a given email than their salaried peers. So what does this actually manifest to? This socioeconomic, this sort of staff class divide? It means you're missing communications about benefits enrollment. You're missing communications and information about arts, athletics, classifieds, on-campus events, and just general campus life. And in a cohort that has really high turnover, this is something we're deeply concerned about, because this reduces connection to the community. And that's extremely important at Davidson, as you'll see later on in this presentation. How is this related to a phone project? Well, again, we'll talk about this a little bit later once we get into the Q&A, but there's some new innovative ways that we're considering to sort of bring these folks back into the fold to make their communication experience more, on par with that of their peers. The more you can innovate in this space, the more you can, put positive pressure on the DEI front. So tools like Zoom Phone, Zoom Chat can be really helpful there. So what was the telecom space like at Davidson before Zoom Phone showed up on the scene? So a few things you should know. Davidson is a college that shares the name of the town. And at one point, we actually, I'm told, housed the entire telecommunications infrastructure for the town of Davidson. If you head up into the attic of our academic building, our main academic building, I think you can still see some remnants of all that copper. And so perhaps as a result, DIDs, we have no shortage of them, upwards of 8,000, I think, when we started this project. And again, this is for a campus population of 2,000 students who no longer even have a dorm phone in 2023, and about 800 telecom provisioned employees. So that's a huge surplus of DIDs. But we never had to pay for them any extra, so it was no problem. When I was a student at Davidson, we were operating on a Nortel system that had been installed circa 2000. Each dorm room had its own analog jack. It had a dedicated DID. And this was already getting a little bit dusty by the time, I enrolled in 2005. And certainly by the time that modern smartphones, that revolution really kicked off with the launch of the iPhone, I think in 2007. Okay, Siri, thank you very much. So after I departed and before I returned as a staff member, IT installed a Cisco system. This was around 2014. It had a footprint of approximately 800 digital voice stations and 50 analog gateways, representing another 300 or so analog endpoints. These would be elevator phones, fire and security alarms, blue light phones, fax machines, and so on. Now, we did something uniquely Davidson when it came to the actual handsets. We bought high-end video phones. And because Davidson culture is very interpersonal, very face-to-face, people actually used these. We're all familiar with the stories of folks getting into online meetings for the first time, and the first thing folks want to do is cover up their cameras or leave their camera off ad infinitum, right? That's never been the case at Davidson. Something about the culture here values that face-to-face contact, and this was really the first time we introduced a digital component to that. So, every desk for every employee had a high-end video phone, and people actually used them. And this made it very easy for us to transition into video meetings when Zoom took over completely during the pandemic, right? People were already accustomed to being on camera, so they stayed on camera. It was no big deal. We weren't leaders in all aspects, unfortunately. Jabber adoption was very poor, and that was either due to technical issues on our part. We just never quite got external non-VPN access working correctly. It could have been lack of feature parity between the Mac OS and Windows versions. Obviously, like a lot of institutions, we have a very large Mac population. Mobility, single number reach, these things never really stuck. So when it came time to transition to Zoom Phone, we had a little bit more of a difficult time convincing folks that a phone could be more than just a phone, right? This has been one of the most sticky points we've tried to overcome and sell to people is this is not just a handset anymore, right? It hasn't been for years, but now with UCaaS systems like Zoom Phone, that's definitely no longer the case. So let's talk a little bit about the timeline, how this project actually progressed.
JD, if I can jump in just for one second as you get rolling, and this might be something you touch on as you go, so feel free to answer at your own pace. But we had a question come in just a few minutes ago. If Davidson uses Microsoft 365, why was Zoom Phone chosen over Teams for this application?
So great question. And there's some very practical and very non-practical answers to this question. So the practical answer is, again, we were all in with Zoom at this point, post-pandemic, and we were not interested in introducing another tool that people needed to learn to use. We liked the Zoom, not just the user experience, but also the administrative experience we found to be very easy. We had some of the IT staff, but also it bears mentioning senior leadership of the college had very negative things to say about the team's user experience, the quality of calling and that sort of thing. And the Mac client, I think, was another thing that a lot of our senior leadership team members at the college were using Mac OS, and they complained constantly about CPU consumption and all these other issues. And I know a lot of those have stabilized over time, and the team's product continues to improve. But that was the landscape that we found ourselves in when we were making this decision, right? High digital fragmentation, universal adoption of Zoom, strong feelings about Teams, and a need to have a very easy to use user experience, but also administrative experience for a team that had just reorged. And as you'll see on this slide, had just eliminated its dedicated telecom position. So if that helps answer, that's kind of where our head was at the time. So in March 2020, the pandemic hits the United States, lockdowns begin, et cetera. And, my team, we find ourselves responding to this by helping build low-code forms to track COVID tests and symptom tracking and all that kind of stuff. But on the communication and collaboration side, you're starting to see this, you're starting to see in real time the importance of focusing on a digital communication and collaboration user experience when what was previously, primarily done face-to-face, traditional brick and mortar style has now suddenly been moved entirely online, right? And hybrid work, which was typically just like a flexibility thing. Hey, you can go to your kid's soccer game and finish the day at home. Now it's instituted, regimented in schedules, right? So the decision was made to create a team that focused on this exclusively. At the same time, like I said, we also eliminated our dedicated telecom position. We knew we wanted to go all in on a modern platform that, was hosted in the cloud and was administered in a similar way to how we were already administering other tools like Google Workspace, right? So we started a telecom study later that year. And I ended up working with a gentleman out of California, Robert Harris, and his folks at Communications Advantage. He was instrumental in identifying what options were out there on the market. Was UCaaS even a fit for us? And among the UCaaS players, based on the criteria we had given him, things that we were looking for, who should we seriously consider? And, once we had things, narrowed down to Zoom based on some of the things I just told you about a minute ago, here's what we should negotiate for, look for, expect in the sales and implementation process. So let's see, later that month, we actually activate our trial. And we're just tinkering at this point, a couple of digital campus team members, seeing what the Zoom phone experience is like. We eventually broaden that to the TNI, the full IT division, so people can start playing with it on their own. And then in October, we end up signing a full pilot agreement. So we get access to more features, more numbers, more licenses, and we start to get really serious about sharpening our pencils and seeing what entering into an agreement would look like. During this time, we also start testing a number of things. We get sample poly hardware for our desktop phones. We get a sample analog gateway. And then we start testing to see if, say, those fire alarms, those security alarms will work on said analog gateway. We want to make sure the life safety stuff is buttoned up as much as possible. And we uncover a number of things that we are going to have to deal with later. So I'll show you momentarily how that turned out. In January of 2022, we actually began our implementation for real. So this means engaging with Zoom professional services and beginning to fill out their PSO document, which is a full inventory of all the users we want imported, all the DIDs we want imported, call queues, auto attendance, etc., and giving that to their engineers so they can start loading in, the bulk of that information into the system. I will say at this point that one lesson learned is all that discovery, all that inventorying, that is on you, right? So getting into any UCaaS project thinking that it's going to be a magic, silver bullet, you still have a lot of work to do on your end to prepare for that transition, right? If your system has been around 10, 15 years, you've probably got skeletons in the closet and plenty of dust bunnies. So be prepared to reckon with those, even though you've got, the professional services folks backing you up. So we start the implementation, we start to get things loaded in. And as we're getting closer to our cutover date at the end of June, we host a Zoom Phone Expo. Now, I mentioned the importance of face-to-face communication at Davidson, that interpersonal experience. This is how we're reaching that last 20% of folks who haven't responded to our emails or our surveys asking them, what device type would you like? We're putting the hardware in their hands. We're messaging them and selling them directly on what this project is going to do for them. And here's how that actually looks. We set up sort of this horseshoe style table in the student union, and we were supported by our Zoom sales staff, his boss, and they bought and brought over tons of promo material and giveaway items, water bottles, Yeti mugs, t-shirts, pins, stickers. We went out to Sam's Club and bought, a giant case of popsicles, candy, chips, and we just kind of threw a party in the union to tell folks about what was going to happen later that month. But it wasn't just like the messaging. We also, like I said, brought hardware with us. So for those folks who said, I don't need a desk phone, a Bluetooth headset would be great, we had headsets on hand to hand out to those who had not yet received them. Those who wanted to see what the difference in the phone experience would be like, right? They were previously using a Cisco video phone. They were going to be using a polyphone without a video camera now. So what does that feel like? We set those up. You can see them on the table off to the left, and had people, press the buttons and dial, see what that experience was like. But also, to the point I made earlier about a phone is not just a phone anymore, right? You see those two Zoom Room mobile carts in the back? We would show people as they came in, hey, dial me from the Zoom app on your phone. I'll take this as a regular call, but then I'll escalate it to a meeting. Okay, now we have video and screen share as well. And it's the same Zoom meeting you've been having since 2015, right? Oh, but since we've introduced Zoom Rooms into the equation in the last couple of years, now watch me transfer or escalate this meeting again to the Zoom room behind you. So now you see, and you can see the light bulbs going off over these people's heads, right, as they witness this in real time. A phone is not just a phone anymore. So that combined with efforts that Eddie, the sales engineer in the Zoom t-shirt, well, he's not a sales engineer. He should be a sales engineer. He's actually one of my engineers. That combined with his efforts to go out to departments to pound the pavement and kind of sell people on, you don't need a desk phone necessarily to do your job. Look at all the other things you can do with a soft phone client that you can't do with a desk phone that sits on your desk all the time. Means we were able to get to 60-40 soft phone to desk phone at Davidson. And I think that number is going to continue to swing in the direction of soft phone forward as people rotate out of the institution, as people retire, and so on. That's the trend that we're seeing.
On the topic of devices, we had another question come in. What did you do for fax lines at the institution as you cut over?
Great question. So when we were in that pilot phase back in 2021, late 2021, I really wanted to see if we could reduce our fax density by maybe porting all of our fax numbers over to eFax. Because we had so many DIDs and because departments were paying for fax cards through their own leases for their own MFPs, there was a total proliferation of fax machines and fax lines. And it's a bit of a mess, honestly. We actually sort of, again, fanned out across campus, and we found, I think, probably a solid third of the fax machines on campus weren't even in use anymore or had just been outright unplugged. And even among those fax machines that were still in use, only 1, 2, maybe 3 of our 50 or so fax lines were getting regular, moderate, not even high, but maybe even moderate volumes of fax. So this would be places like registrar, to whom this no longer really applies since they now do electronic transcripts, and student health, who has to fax, protected health information occasionally. I would still love to engage in a proper eFax project. It is my personal goal and mission to eliminate every analog device on the Davidson campus in the next 5 years, one way or another. We didn't quite get there in this phase of the project, but we are bringing them into the fold. And then I think we'll have a lot more opportunity to, say, move to eFax once our analog transition fully completes, likely at the end of this fiscal year, which you can see on this slide. So it's very much in my mind, the fewer fax machines that we have, the fewer analog gateways we need, and the more people can potentially benefit from eFax if they need it at all. So that's the work that's still left to be done. All right, so cutover day arrives on June 30th. Myself, the CIO, the deputy CIO, and some other IT leaders are in Greencastle, Indiana, halfway across the country from Davidson, at the Consortium of Liberal Arts Colleges conference. We've talked about the plan. We've got Zoom phones porting team ready to go. my engineers have assured me that they feel comfortable and that everything's going to go according to plan. And so in between sessions at this conference, I pull up the phone number screen in Zoom phone, and at the scheduled time, after all of our preparation, I get to watch all those numbers go from, pending to active, right? The ones that have been loaded in by the porting team. That is one thing I'll say was an incredible value of having Zoom Professional Services, is not having to worry about, say, AT&T botching our port. Having a port team that has been given a specific task of making all of these numbers go simultaneously, and having them have a back channel into AT&T to make sure it happens, not us calling the 800 number customer service line, right? So, we were confident that things would go to plan, and they did. And to your point about, or to the title of this session, right? Catapulting telecom, not slowly migrating, not trickling telecom, right? We did a flash cut. We didn't feel necessarily comfortable maintaining two systems running simultaneously. So, we migrated every single employee workstation that we could at the same time. And we did a lot of extra preparation and automation in order to get to that point. And I'll share some details of that once we get into the Q&A later in the presentation.
Yeah, you jumped ahead of one of the questions that we just had come in about, did you run Zoom Phone and Cisco in parallel for some time? What was that experience like? So it seems like you minimized that as much as you could, or didn't do it at all.
Yeah.
Another question on what was the user experience like during the DID port over? So, maybe those first couple of weeks, or, what was that user experience like?
Sure. Okay, that's actually a good question. So the user experience like during the actual cutover was, we had prepared users that at this specific time, I think it was 11 a.m. on June 30th, you're going to have a potential outage of 10 minutes as your DID transitions from this service over to that service, the AT&T service over to the new Zoom Phone provider. And, because that's a disruptive change, and because we didn't have both the Cisco and the Polyphone plugged in simultaneously, first of all, we didn't have enough network jacks to do that. We chose a date in the summer when most faculty would be far away from campus, when things were quiet, not during, say, we went ahead and moved up some departments that had like an end of fiscal year deadline for, say, financial reconciliation or fundraising. We had already moved those folks in advance and put it together some creative number forwarding stuff so they could still, talk to folks who are on the Cisco system. But it really was just patchwork to have them avoid any disruption during an end of year cutover event. So, folks might have been out 10, 15 minutes during that process. But, for the most part, if they followed the instructions that we had laid out for them and moved their Ethernet cable from the Cisco phone over to the Polyphone at the scheduled time, things went off without a hitch. Any other questions on that?
I don't think on that. We've had a few other questions come in, but I want to make sure you get through the timeline here. So I think we can probably hold a few of these until the Q&A.
Sure. Very good. So the cutover happens on the 30th. And, I think, to the point about, well, what were the next few days like, right? We had to go around campus kind of explaining to people how, say an HR, a user that was assigned directly the HR number, now the HR number was a call queue, which could ring on many folks, and that's why they don't see the HR line on their phone anymore. We had to deal with things like people forgetting to set their voicemail up, right? Their voicemail greeting, because we didn't import people's prior greetings. And just kind of some of the regular bug squashing you would expect from a major migration, but it was things that I'm not sure that we could have avoided. Honestly, anytime you make a major cut between platforms, there's going to be things that fall between the cracks and arise that you never anticipated. But again, that's why we did it in the summer when most people had a lower workload or were away from campus entirely. So after that, we started to turn our attention to really fine-tuning the E911 strategy that we had developed. So we actually contracted that same consultant I mentioned earlier to audit our E911 strategy and make sure that we were compliant with Kerry's Law and Ray Baum's Act, and to help identify any shortcomings, things that we didn't think of as we were rolling out nomadic E911. And I have another slide about that later, but suffice it to say, the audit was important and extremely valuable to us. Towards the end of this year, we hope to complete the analog transition. So we've all gone ahead and ordered our audio codes, analog gateways, anywhere from 2 to 24 ports. And we are in the process of, setting those up and provisioning them now. Unfortunately, Davidson doesn't have like a single analog termination point in our main data center. It's almost like an analog distribution or access layer. We've got, analog terminates all over the place on campus. So we had to just buy a lot of smaller gateways, unfortunately. But that's what we're focused on right now. And then at the end of this fiscal year, the project will be closed, assuming that all of that goes to plan. So where do things stand now? These numbers are like maybe 2 months out of date. But for licensing, we went with a mix of metered and unlimited. I know a lot of folks actually go straight unlimited because they don't want to think about it, because it seems like it might be easier to manage. We ran the math. If you are making less than 2 hours of outbound calls per month, I think the numbers show that you would do just fine with a metered license. If you're making more than 2 hours of outbound calls per month, again, outside your system, unlimited is better. So we've implemented a semesterly operational process in which we kind of rebalance and reconcile who should have what license. In this way, we can save a little bit of money and not give anybody too little or too much service for what they need for their phones. 200 common area phones. Again, this could be the cashier station. It could be the phone by the time clock. It could be the phone in the steam plant. These are phones not attached to an individual. And for these, we're using our Poly Edge B20s, so less expensive devices. Most employees are getting a Poly VVX 450. Did we actually need a big expensive phone like this? Probably not. But we've just been through, again, this huge period of change at Davidson and the pandemic. We're taking away, right? We're taking away something from people off their desk, a video phone they're already comfortable using. So we're going to give them something that at least somewhat resembles the premium phone that they had before. We've also got, 23 Zoom rooms at this point, although that number has probably grown since these slides were made. And then you can kind of read through our DIDs there. And then as far as sites are considered, how they're broken up, like for location, automatic location detection, we have a single site because we're a single campus, with the exception of like this lake campus thing where we have one building. And in that one site, we have 300 dispatchable locations. So it could be Baker Athletic Complex, basement, west wing, right? And the street address that comes with that and the sublocation that would help first responders find a 911 caller. We also support personal locations. So we actually have an IT policy that was amended specifically for this reason. If our users are prompted to enter an emergency address in Zoom, say if they work from home or are traveling for a conference, they are required by IT policy to enter that location. So a 911 call made from their soft phone client can be registered at the correct location. So that's the basics of our story. I know that was a lot. We have, I think, 19 minutes, Adam, is that right? So I want to take any questions remaining, and then I can dip into other appendix slides if needed.
Yeah, plenty of time, I think, to get through these questions. And I think, Johan, I'll invite you to moderate from here. I know you had a few discussion questions you wanted to bring up, but we have a few more from the audience that I think maybe we get to first, and we can dive into the additional.
Let's focus on the audience questions, and thank you for hosting this event today. My name is Johan, based in California, and really thankful for the partnership with Adam and JD Mills on our projects. There's a few questions that have come up that we want to address. One was the network and security upgrades that were done to support the rollout. And that's obviously very important. And I think I remember you saying you're on an Aruba Wi-Fi and a separate backend network.
Yes. So on the network side, I'd say we actually struggled a little bit at first with getting our polyphones to provision on what was a very restricted voice network and its ability to say, contact the Zoom auto provisioning servers, contact the Poly auto provisioning servers. So we struggled to work around that at first. Eventually made the determination that, we shouldn't be so nervous about up-to-date supported hardware reaching from inside the network to outside the network to provision itself. So we sort of, removed that restriction. We didn't add any jacks, like I mentioned. Many of our rooms remain single jack. So that's why we had to have users switch from A to B at cutover time, which again didn't turn out to really be an issue. When I hear the infrastructure folks talk about the future of the network, it's increasingly wireless forward. So that's no surprise there. It's also one reason why we focused on the wireless strategy for E911 location detection. So, you mentioned Aruba, Johan. So we wrote an integration that pulled the full list of access points and their associated BSSIDs for every SSID, for every spectrum, there's a BSSID that uniquely identifies that connection between the Zoom client and the access point, right? So we wrote automations that would automatically map the location in Zoom to that BSSID, even as new access points get introduced into the environment, as long as they meet the naming scheme. And that's recorded in our mapping table. We're automatically detecting that location correctly. And unfortunately, at our campus, Wi-Fi is actually the most accurate way of determining user location, because we do not have a perfect port map of every switch port to every jack, and nor is that likely to happen anytime soon with the size of our staff. And so, in a lot of cases, we can do, say, a subnet detection on say, like a floor of an academic building, or a small house where maybe one administrative office works. But wireless can at least get us in a stone's throw, right, from the access point, and can reasonably determine where the caller is. But that's basically the extent of the networking modifications or changes that we had to do in support of this project.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I have a couple more questions that come in through the Q&A. We'll make sure we address those. Examples of what you can do with a soft phone that you can't do with a hard phone. And I guess number one is flexibility of location. They can move it to anywhere. And I'm assuming you still have a significant number of employees that work remotely, or at least part of the time.
Yes.
What are some of the other benefits that you see the soft phone has enabled Davidson to be more productive?
So I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, right? But I think about things like that call to meeting to Zoom phone escalation. I don't know every feature of every product that's out there, but that was new to us, and Zoom phone made it relatively easy to achieve. Other popular features that people are really enjoying, and this is more of a Zoom versus other platforms, not a soft phone versus desk phone thing, but people are enjoying the features like line delegation. So if I'm, say, going on parental leave for 3 months, I can actually just delegate my line to my supervisor. They can see any SMS messages that come in on my behalf, which, by the way, is another thing that you can kind of do on a soft phone that you can't do on a desktop phone. They can see voicemails left for me. They can take my calls, and in the soft phone client, that separation between this was a call for me, supervisor, or this was a call for my report is made very clear to the end user. So that's just a handful of things that people are enjoying. And I talked earlier about the single pane of glass as well. The fact that your phone tab is right next to your chat tab, is right next to your meetings tab, is another differentiator, I think, for the soft phone experience.
I think one of the biggest benefits I keep hearing is the security and privacy, is that people don't want to necessarily expose their own personal mobile phone number, and the ability to use the Zoom phone and hide that from parents and students and other people that you need to interact with.
Oh, absolutely. And that's been really big for folks like our advancement office, the people who raise the money, right? What do you mean I don't have to give out my personal mobile number anymore? I can just give out my business line. I'm all for it, right? And that was one of the key ways in which one of my staff members was really able to convert large numbers of people from, the desk phone experience with which they were far more comfortable, over to trying something new, was telling them these extra benefits they would get if they switched.
Great answer. And a couple more questions before we come to the end of the event. What made you decide to go full native Zoom versus bringing your own PSTN provider?
I would say, again, ease of management, and centralization. Without giving away too much, I mean, Zoom was accommodating in the contract process, and we felt that any premium that we might have paid, which, I'm not saying there was a premium or that it was exorbitant at all, was worth it to get that centralized ease of administration experience. Again, on a team where we now view Telecom as just one other feature of a communication app that people are already using, is the easiest way I can explain it.
That makes sense. Other question, did you have existing call trees and hunt groups? Was Zoom able to accommodate those situations? And maybe you can talk a little bit more about those skeletons and dust bunnies you encountered during the implementation.
Yes.
Those are always.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we had a ton of those. And when you go through the Zoom phone professional service experience, it's your job as the customer to document what you want to keep, right? And provide that to Zoom so they can do the load for you. And to be clear, that your task is more difficult than their task, right? You have to confront your current configuration and whether it is still needed or accurate, named correctly. It's Zoom's job is to take what you give them and port and get it into their software as easily and quickly as possible. So that's one less thing you have to worry about. But you still have to worry about plenty, which is, figuring out what you want to bring over and if it's even accurate anymore. But yes, we had lots of those.
Right. And I recently switched providers on my own personal mobile phone, and even that doesn't seem to be easy these days. It took like over an hour and a half discussions and took a few days to happen. So I think it's natural. Another question, can you elaborate on your experience with life safety services on the gateways?
Yeah.
In that sense, I'd also love to hear a little bit more on 911 and Raybaum Act and Kerry's Law. You mentioned in a previous call that you had an emergency situation. Love to see how that went with the new Zoom phone system.
Sure. So the first question was around life safety, right? So we tried the audio codes analog gateway in one of our theater buildings over winter break when we knew no one would be around. We connected our fire and security alarms to it. The problem that we found was that the speed at which the fire alarm panel is dialing these DTMF tones is too fast when shortened by the Zoom phone service to be understood by the remote end of that call, right? As the panel is dialing out on its backup auxiliary analog line, those tones are just getting chopped to the point where the remote side of that conversation, the fire alarm company, can't understand that. And so we debated on this for probably a month of what to do about the situation. We got Zoom phone engineers involved, and we just determined this was the wrong approach. We never should have done this in the first place. We never should have had the primary connection for those panels be, an Ethernet network connection that was running on the same network as the analog gateway that was the backup connection, right? Why was that ever approved? I'll never know. But it is what it is. What we ended up doing instead is punting on the analog transition until later this year, like I said. And in the meantime, we invested a lot of time and energy in getting all the alarm panels moved over to a mesh wireless system. And that project is like 95% complete and is allowing us to move forward with blue light phones, emergency call boxes, fax machines, that elevator phones, that kind of thing. So those are going on analog gateways. It's just that the fire alarm and security alarm panels cannot. So to your question about E911 and regulatory compliance, one thing we instituted was that internal response team notification, that synchronous notification requirement, which I believe is in Kerry's Law. And we set that up to go to our public safety, our campus police. So when someone dials 911, as we had happen for the very first time after this cutover about 2 weeks ago, I want to say, campus police, including the chief of police, the captain, the sergeant, and the officer on call, they get a big flashing red notification on their cell phone client or a call on their desk phone. They can listen into the call immediately. They can choose to barge into the call and actually interact with the caller and the PSAP, the actual the 911 responder, or they can just let it go. And in this case, the chief of police said, sounds like a medical call that is under control. So he just said acknowledged, and he hung up. So that's how we're dealing with carries. With Ray-Baum's Act, it's all about location specificity, right? Getting people to a dispatchable location. What is a dispatchable location? Well, it's definitely not your main campus address, and it's probably not down to, the individual room level, in my opinion. With wireless, that's really not possible, right? You cannot confine Wi-Fi to a single room unless you line it with lead, and nobody's going to do that, right? So, we are willing to accept the risk that getting as specific as we can with Wi-Fi, and in rare cases with manually addressing some desktop phones that might be on a subnet that spans multiple buildings, is the best approach for us. So yeah, and an audit can help, right? Hire somebody to help you see the blind spots that you can't see. So for example, a wireless access point sitting on the 3rd floor of a big atrium. If somebody calls from the atrium, they might report the 3rd floor instead of the ground floor, which they're actually on. So those are the things you need to be aware of when you set up any kind of dispatchable location mapping.
And I know we're on Zoom phone at some company, obviously, and I get regular notifications if I leave on travel that says, please update your location, so that it does that automatically. I think there's a couple more questions. I wonder, Adam, for time purposes, I have actually a personal question. You mentioned having to sell the transition, right? It's like your users are reluctant to change, people are getting used to certain systems, and you did a great job doing that. And then a separate question is, you also have to sell this to management when you make a transition of the technology. Would you give our listeners today some recommendations of how to convince management in this case to make a transition like this?
Got it. So one thing that definitely helped sell it again was the change in the team dynamic. So going from a team with a dedicated telecom engineer to a team of application analysts, and needing a tool that would reflect that skill set, right? So we don't need necessarily our folks to be, in the shadows, going into network closets constantly, tinkering with the Cisco system. We need them to be writing knowledge base articles, hosting training events, writing communications that can then be vetted by our IT communications persons and sent out. We need them to be able to go and talk to individual departments and explain this change to them, to be able to organize an in-person expo event, right? That's the skill set that benefits us most at the type of institution that Davidson is. Other ways we sold it to management, there's the elimination of technical debt, there's potential cost savings, which again, you can see how much of that you can achieve during the contracting process. And then if you've studied the communication landscape at your institution, maybe you're experiencing that same fragmentation that we are, and maybe folks are looking for a change, a single pane of glass, a unified user experience. Again, we were not in a position where we were really looking to introduce a whole new separate tool that might not have even have been as good of a user experience as what people were already accustomed to seeing in Zoom. So that helped quite a bit. And like I said, the pandemic was also a big driver for us. Like, people are capable of more change than they thought they were. Let's add new features to the tool that they've grown to use, and in some cases really enjoy using every single day over the last couple of years. But yeah, I felt that we had to sell our users far more than I had to sell management. We were all there experiencing the same thing at the same time, making the same observations, and it was selling the users that was the concerted effort we had to make.
Got it. That makes sense. Did you have to find external funding sources? Did you have to look at any grant programs, or were you able to fund this out of IT directly?
So I think we ended up setting up a capital project to fund this. It was funded, and this type of capital project is approved by the college trustees. So, the CIO went to a trustee meeting, made the pitch with the supporting materials that my team provided him. They funded it, it was approved. And so from that capital project, we paid for obviously all the phones, the implementation services, but the analog gateways and the consulting and all that sort of stuff. So it's been mostly self-funded, and we see it as a financial net positive once all things are taken into consideration.
Adam, I know we're coming to the end. I know there's a few more questions that we may want to address afterwards. I'll leave that up to you, but I want to thank everyone for attending today's session. JD, special thanks to you. I know you not only presented today, but also at EduCause last fall, which was great. And I'd love to maybe revisit this whole conversation in a year from now to see how things are going and your experience with that. And I'll pass it back to Adam.
Yeah, I'd like to, just reiterate those thanks for spending the time with us, JD, and kind of taking us through that journey. We do have a couple questions that we have documented here. And JD, maybe we can get some quick written answers and help to distribute those out in follow up to the session. Like I said, we'll be sending the recording so we can send a couple of these additional answers around and make sure we're still respecting everybody's time here today. I do want to reemphasize too for everybody as we talk about finding funding sources and how you pay for this stuff. Edge, through our partnership, our contract with Zoom, we can work with you guys to try and identify opportunities for discounts, try and identify effective ways to fund these kinds of efforts. Additionally, through Edge Market or procurement co-op that I was mentioning earlier, we have a very broad hardware and software catalog under that procurement vehicle. So one of the challenges members brought to us was it's really hard to build a solution that consists of different vendors and different products, to go find a bunch of different contracts and find a way to aggregate that under one project and kind of one dollar figure on a spend for something like this. Our contracts make it really easy to build these solutions, whether you need new handsets or headset devices or additions to your wireless network or anything like that. We can help you centralize all that stuff in one place too. So if you have any questions about how to pull all this stuff together, Edge can help to coordinate some of those efforts. And I expect you'll probably hear from one of our member coordinators as well, just to see if you have any questions or if you'd like to follow up with any of the experts at Zoom, with JD and his team, or anything else that Edge can be helpful with. So with that, I think I'd just like to thank everybody for spending the time with us today, all our attendees and Johan for joining us and JD as well. I think this was a great session, lots of great Q&A, and we'll get those additional questions answered afterwards. And yeah, just thanks, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoyed it.
Thanks, everybody.